Thanks again for coming. I'm Ray Gauss, so they tell me, Digital Asset Management Architect at Alfresco, where I have product management and software engineering roles. You're here to hear a little bit more about media management. We'll talk a little bit about what exactly we mean when we say digital asset management. That can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We'll talk about its importance and why we need to consider some of the differences and particulars around rich media. And we're going to talk about how Alfresco addresses digital asset management. Now, if you're expecting to see a lot of Eclipse screens and code, this is not a technical deep dive here. We're going to go over kind of a feature overview of things, and we're going to talk a little bit about how some of this stuff works, but we're not going to get real deep in the weeds of coding anything. So hopefully we know that digital asset management is dealing with rich media files, right? We're obviously talking about images, audio, video, but that includes the production files that go into using and making those, things like InDesign, Illustrator, Premiere for video, After Effects, even ebook formats. But more importantly, digital asset management is about people, the people involved in this content lifecycle, the processes involved, and the workflows that tie those together. Now, this could really be said of pretty much any ECM segment, but it's particularly true, I think, in the world of digital asset management. We have some very particular people that have some very specific needs and have to do some very particular processes on this type of content. So it's really important to address that, and not just particular people, but quite a wide range of people as well. We have these creative types that are producing this content. They're very different personalities than the legal staff that has to review licensing agreements associated with it. So it's quite a wide range that we have to deal with, and it's similar on the processes end. And again, important to pay attention to comprehensive workflows that follow the entire content lifecycle to tie all that together. But perhaps most important difference between those kind of segments is the content itself, right? This is not a document. This is emotional, moving content. Documents don't often make you smile, right? People start to form an emotional bond with this type of content. So it's important to recognize that difference. And again, we talked about it takes creative people to produce this and extract real value from this kind of content. And on the technical side of things, we have no full text metadata to search on. In a document, we can always just parse the whole thing, pull out the entire text of the document, and search it. We don't necessarily have that in rich media all times. So what about sort of the ecosystem and market, things happening around digital asset management? Well, in the past, we didn't have a lot of enterprises necessarily dealing with loads of rich media. For one reason, it was expensive to produce, and they just didn't have a lot of need for it in the past. So as a result, we often found that digital asset management systems in organizations existed as these silos, often many of them in a single organization. Or we had a few gatekeepers that had access to this, and you had to ask Bob to give me the video file. Very convoluted processes, and there were little or no integrations with other enterprise systems. Now, of course, that is completely different, and pretty much all enterprises out there are dealing with rich media in some form or another. And as we saw a little bit this morning, there has been just an explosion in content. And things like video are a large part of that. If we look at just the consumer space, in 2013, 66% of all consumer internet traffic was video. That's huge. And in 2018, that's expected to be near 80%. One reason for that is that this stuff is obviously a lot easier to produce. Probably almost everybody in this room has got a smartphone with a pretty decent camera on it, capable of making something that's usable for, say, marketing collateral. And another reason that we have new forms of assets here. We have things like recorded meeting videos, training videos. So it's a lot more prevalent. And of course today, enterprise integration is just an absolute must. We can't have these isolated silos. And in terms of the market and sort of vendor landscape, in the past, digital asset management was kind of a separate entity from ECM. We had these pure play DAM vendors. We had ECM vendors. Again, you'd find both in a single organization. And there were, of course, subsets, particular verticals within digital asset management. Things like brand asset management, things like media asset management for video. I'm not sure why it gets media in the front of it, because it's all media, but that's what the industry calls it. Product information management for e-commerce side of things. So there are a lot of different sort of subsegments there. But what I think is going to happen to this market, and what we're starting to see, is that these kind of general rich media features and needs are going to be absorbed by the ECM market. We're going to need to have this functionality in our ECM systems. And I think we'll continue to have these specific vertical solutions around video production, around marketing, around e-commerce, but they're going to obviously need to be much more tightly integrated with the rest of our ECM backbone. So what about Alfresco and digital asset management? Well, we've kind of been secret lovers for a while. We've always had this content agnostic architecture, right? We could always throw any kind of file that we wanted at the repository, and we can get back thumbnails, we can get back extracted metadata in a lot of cases. And we've had lots of fantastic solutions from our partners, from our customers out there, but we've never really addressed it directly ourselves. And that's changing. We're introducing a new media management module, and this sits on top of our core Alfresco 1, and it's meant to improve the infrastructure for those general ECM needs around rich media, and to address functionality that cuts across all of those different verticals that we talked about. And this is to help build a stronger foundation for DAM solutions from our partners and for our customers to build, to really get you a lot further in some of the basics in that lower level architecture and infrastructure, so that you can take it and deliver your custom targeted vertical solution. So some of the features that are included in that set are around better and smarter metadata extraction and embedding, common content relationships, scalable and flexible transformations, some things around the user interface, of course, some light media editing, and then towards the end of the content lifecycle, dealing with content distribution networks. Now, I was having trouble coming up with a common thread, a common use case that we could model that everybody could relate to. Since digital asset management does mean so many different things to so many different people, I would pick one and half the people in the room could relate and the other half couldn't. So instead I decided to go with something that hopefully everyone can relate to. So we'll put this in the context of personal media, dealing with your own photos and videos. We probably all do that every day. Unfortunately, that means I'm going to make you look at pictures of my kids, so bear with me there. Now the fun begins. Metadata. You all came here to talk about metadata. I can feel it, right? Not so much. It's not that bad, and it's extremely important for rich media. And we're not just talking about the technical metadata here, things like EXIF or specifics around the file manifestation, things like the file size or the file creator. We're talking here about informational metadata, things that describe our abstract of the content that's represented by this particular file. Now, by far the most popular and well-known informational metadata standard out there is IPTC, International Press Telecommunications Council. These guys have been around since the 60s, and in the 70s they started developing and publishing standards for the news industry. Now, as I said, they're most widely known for this informational metadata standard that again describes the abstract of the content. So this metadata applies to, say, even a physical version of this and all of the file formats. Now, the first iteration of this standard in terms of its usability, being able to embed this in files, was through what's now called legacy IPTC or IIM. That was introduced back in the early 90s. If you were lucky, you had one of these in your pocket. And then in 2004, they came out with IPTC Core, which closely modeled the legacy. It cleaned up some things, it renamed some things, it eliminated some confusion. And that went against XMP, which is Extensible Metadata Platform. This is a fantastic specification. It was originally from Adobe, and now it's an ISO standard, I believe. that allows you to embed all sorts of different metadata schemas into all kinds of different file formats. So this was a much more flexible way to embed this metadata in the files themselves. That was, again, 2004, starting to look a little more familiar. And then in 2008, there we go, our old friend. In 2008, we had the IPTC extension, which added even more informational metadata fields. It's as big as the original spec, and including things around lots of rights management, all sorts of additional informational metadata included in that spec. So what kinds of fields are we actually talking about here? A lot of these are pretty common. You got things like caption description, keywords, our credit line, which is very important, things like contact info. And we're not just talking about here, say, the photographer who took the image, but all kinds of roles associated with producing that or different rights holders involved. Things like a job identifier for being able to track sort of a workflow between organizations, sometimes called a transmission reference. We have things, it gets into incredible detail, things like location created and location shown. If I take a picture from a mountaintop of a city line, my location created is very different than the location that I'm actually showing. So we're not talking about geo-coordinates necessarily here, but things like the venue of an event. And again, these are widely accepted standards. This is in the file info of the majority of the Adobe Creative Suite products, but it's in many of the media editing and cataloging applications that you're probably used to dealing with all the time. If you open up Apple Preview and you add some keywords or a description, that's going into IPTC. Similarly with Windows built-in media editors, that's all going in as IPTC. Now with the media management module, we extract all of these fields from both the core and extension specification. That's a total of, I think, 94 fields. And again, they're quite extensive. And it's important that you develop integrations and workflows using these standards so that different systems can communicate with each other, so that you're not installing additional file info panels in Photoshop, so that when you get outside of your organization, everybody knows what you're talking about because it's all in a standard specification. That sounds great, but do we really need all this? Well, yeah, this is not a document. We don't have that full text. Without this kind of informational metadata, we might never know what this is a picture of or why it was produced. So let's take a look at that extraction demo. So here I've got Share with Media Management module installed. I'm going to open up an image in Photoshop, more kids, sorry. And we'll go to the File Info panel there, and we can see the different tabs within File Info. We've got IPTC, IPTC Extension, so we'll fill in a couple of fields here, Creator. You can see there's quite a number of fields. We'll go down and add in a description as well, sometimes called a caption. A couple of keywords. I realize that you all probably can't see the actual words there. Our all-important credit line. And then we'll head over to the IPTC Extension tab. So one thing that's really nice that Adobe has done is really follow the specification here pretty closely and calls the fields what they're actually called in the specification. So we'll put in some model info here. We'll click OK. We're going to save that, which is again going to embed that information as XMP. And then we're going to drag that right into Share. We'll go to the document details, and we can see our familiar EXIF metadata that we're used to, but we've also got here a new section of IPTC Core. And there's a creator that we filled in. We can see all of our information, description, those keywords, our very important credit line, and we can see the full extension specification as well, and that model information that we entered. So it's great to have that in the document details page. But one other thing you may not have noticed is that we're also mapping those keywords right to Alfresco's tags. So as soon as it comes in, it's associated with our tagging mechanism, and you can easily navigate around and share using those tagging filters. There are a few other specifications that are extracted by the media management module. I can follow up with those if people have particular interest. Mostly they'll be used around workflows and things like that that aren't necessarily exposed through the UI. And I want to again stress the importance of having these integrations and workflows go over known, agreed upon standards. And one effort that Alfresco is behind, trying to move that forward, is a new technical committee from Oasis called CMIS for DAM. This is not the logo. I made up the logo. We haven't even got to that point yet, but Alfresco is participating in this new technical committee that's meant to try to define the standards for communicating between these different systems, likely as kind of a profile on top of CMIS saying, if you need to communicate informational metadata, it should be over IPTC, and here's how you define that specification. If you need to communicate rights metadata or video metadata, here's the specifications that should be used. There may be other features of the specification as well, but again, this is just in the early days. Definitely look out for more news there. But if you just cannot find a field in one of those specifications that you can use, I would say to you, please go look again, because there's a lot of them in there. They've been very well thought out. A lot of different industries have participated in forming these. But if you really can't, you can do custom XMP. So again, XMP being a very flexible format for storing all kinds of metadata in all kinds of files. So you can do a custom XMP. And in fact, it's I should have made this a lot harder, but it's as easy as putting in a mapping into your global properties to say that I'd like this particular metadata field as defined by the key coming out of my library, like Tika, to map to this particular custom data model. We can look at an example of that. If we go into Photoshop again, we'll open up another file of this poor little guy that didn't like his first haircut. We'll go to File Info. We saw the IPTC before, but if we look at the top here, we have another File Info panel. Now this is just the panel that Adobe provides as kind of an example that just goes through all the different types of fields that are available. In this case, we'll just put a value in the very first simple text field. And in the repository side, I've set up a mapping that says take that custom text field and map it to CM title. So this time, when we bring in this document and we go to the share interface, we're going to see that that was entered in and mapped as our title field. But again, don't do that. Go to the spec first, please. Now, there's also the concept of metadata embedding in media management modules. So one important use case for that is often people need to, say, embed that all-important credit line before an image leaves their organization. So right from share, you can set up a rule, let's say, on a folder or through a workflow, and before this gets to the next stage, I want to actually put that back into the file before it goes anywhere else, like, say, outside of my firewall. Then those same people can open up that. They have no excuse to say, I don't remember where I found this, and I just published it. No, you could have just gone to File Info. You could have just opened up Apple Preview. You could have done any of these things to be able to determine at least where you got it from. So that's an important use case there. I won't demo that one, but if people are interested, come see me afterwards. All right, content transfer. You guys made it through metadata. Congratulations. I promise I won't talk any more about it. Content transformations are very important for rich media, as most of you probably already know. It's one thing to have a document and have a PDF version of it. It's another thing to have an image and need 20 different renditions of this thing in different resolutions, different file formats, perhaps different compression. It gets even worse for video. So if we talk about video for a second, Alfresco's provided these sample context files for quite a while with the base Alfresco 1 distribution. That was a simple content transformer and had a simple command line pass-through. So when you define something like a thumbnail or another rendition, another format, you were just giving the options that FFmpeg needed to take it from one to the other. So things like frame rate or frame size, the codecs that you wanted in that alternate version, The media management module takes a very different approach here. First of all, it's a full-blown subsystem. Many of you are familiar with that, which allows you to all sorts of options around configuration, turning on and off. But most importantly, it gets at this concept of expressing those options around codec, frame rate, bit rate in these abstract transformation options. So a Java object of transformation options. And then it's the transformer's job to turn those options into those FFmpeg command line options. And we'll see a little later why that's so important. So this concept of video renditions, or transcoding as it's called, taking one video format into another. If any of you are familiar with, say, ripping of DVDs, you know that it can take quite a long time to do this sort of thing. No matter what kind of hardware you throw at it, it's going to take a long time. And more importantly, it's extremely resource intensive. Many of our computers may be lying in a heap after trying to transcode large amounts of video. So how are we going to deal with that? We don't really want that on the repository. That doesn't sound too nice. We're introducing a completely new framework called Gytheio. Pronounced, you probably can't see that, pronounced Gytheio. I get a lot of questions on that one. What we're trying to do there is develop this lower level content investigation and manipulation framework. It handles all kinds of things around content, things like change, event handling, metadata extraction, hash and checksum computation, and of course, what we're talking about here, transformations. Now this obviously needs to be distributed and scalable, so we're leveraging messaging technologies there to be able to build these incredibly lightweight worker nodes. I lost my video here. I've actually had these nodes running on a Raspberry Pi, lots of fun. I brought one with me. We can try to get it running again at the experts bar if you're interested. And we obviously need these independent of the Alfresco repository. So this is a lower level framework that the repository can draw upon and build completely independent solutions. I'm not going to go through this in too much detail here, but the way Gytheio works is we have a client application. In this case, it's going to be the Alfresco repository itself. The first thing we're going to do is push our source content out to a shared content workspace. Now that could be a SAN drive that's shared between the repository and the node. That could be an S3 bucket, WebDAV, FTP. So it's kind of agnostic to what technology is used to push that stuff around. We're going to form a transformation request that's got things like a source content reference and those all-important abstract transformation options, things like our codec, our bitrate, frame rate. We're going to put that on a messaging queue that has nodes that are listening to it. It's going to pull off that request. It's going to fetch that source content off of that shared workspace, or it may be able to operate on it directly, depending on the scenario there. And then it's going to pass that on to a Gytheio transformer worker that's going to do the work of taking those transformation options and turning them into command line options, library options, API calls. So it performs that work on a target reference. It pushes that target to that same or different shared content workspace. And then it's going to construct a transformation reply message that says, hey, I'm done. Here's where you can find it, or all of the results. There's lots of different options there. It constructs that reply, puts that on another message queue that the client application, again in this case the Alfresco repository, is listening to. It then consumes that target off of that shared content workspace and ingests it into the repository. It follows through with whatever else needs to happen in that process, if it's rendition associated with the source node. And notice here we're talking about an image magic worker. We were just talking about video, but these high resolution TIFFs or image raw file formats are also incredibly resource intensive to deal with. If you're not familiar with them, image raw is a proprietary camera format for, well, with the exception of DNG, we won't get into all that, but it's very high resolution image that takes a lot of processing. We're talking about anywhere from 15 to 50 megabyte files easy for a single image. So that's very resource intensive as well. We need to get that off of the repository. Now, one other thing that we can do with this kind of technology is do the same thing locally. So we have here on the left a out-of-the-box Alfresco 1 image magic content transformer. For details, that's a proxy content transformer that actually wraps a little worker. And within that method, we have that important transform method that in the case of Alfresco 1, we did have a lot of those options, those transformation options in an abstract form already. And we did do the translation of that to ImageMagick command line options through this worker class. So what we're doing is moving that code into a Gytheio worker, an ImageMagick worker, that contains that same method and can do that same conversion from abstract to command line options. So that allows us to use exactly the same code locally that our transformation nodes are using. And then we can also wrap any Gytheio worker that we come up with in a Gytheio content transformer worker and just define what kinds of media types that it's allowed to work on. So one way of visualizing that is if Alfresco is the awesome enterprise class ship made of Legos in this case, Gytheio would be the box of Legos, right? So you could reassemble the entire enterprise out of that if you wanted to. You could build something completely different if you wanted to. Now I keep going back to these abstract transformation options. And one of the reasons that we want to do that is we don't want to be tied to a particular implementation like FFmpeg. In some cases, you may not want to maintain a transcoding infrastructure. These are lightweight nodes. You probably don't really want to run it off of a Pi. That's just kind of a trivial example. You don't want to have a closet full of Pis somewhere. So you have the opportunity in some deployment scenarios to be able to utilize transcoding services. Things like zencoder.com, AWS Elastic Transcoder. Right? So these make sense for deployment environments where you're already deployed on cloud or you have really high bandwidth on-prem deployment and you don't mind the overhead of shipping things off to get that kind of work done. And these usually charge per minute fees of audio or video that's being transcoded. And of course the advantage is that there's no infrastructure to set up or maintain. You just create an account and the workers are then accessing the API, sending the content there, and performing those same transformations. So we've got these services, and we got local, and we got remote. How are we going to deal with all this? Well, luckily, all of this follows the same content transformer prioritization that we've already got in Alfresco 1. So you can define priorities based on source to target MIME type, things like that, or extensions. And the way that the media management module introduces these additional ones is that we keep these inexpensive transformations locally. So things like grabbing a thumbnail out of a video, that's not resource intensive. It's very quick. Almost no CPU usage to do that sort of thing. So that stays locally, but then of course our transcoding is going to go out to either a service or one of these remote nodes. Similarly with our raw or high resolution TIFF conversions. Now, this guy's talking about transcoding and all this. I don't know if I really need all that. That sounds excessive, right? That's those of you with Rolls Royces know exactly what this is. Mine is in the shop at the moment, but this is a built-in umbrella into the door. This thing drains down to the pavement. Yeah, we all need this, right? Now, this is not an excessive feature. This is something that you really do need and will use. If we talk about just an iPhone 5, who here has an iPhone 6? Anyone? Oh, 1, 2, nice. Probably have a holder for it in the Rolls Royce too, right? I don't have one yet. I'm not fortunate enough to own the 6 or 6 Plus. It's got an even better camera than the 5, as you're probably familiar with. That thing will do 240 frames per second at 720p. But even on a 5, if we talk about 1080p, 30 frames per second in North America, sorry, 30 frames per second, a little biased. This stuff is already H.264 compressed, which is a fantastic codec, right? We get a ton of compression with really high quality still. Those files are still roughly 180 megabytes per minute. So when you're down at the party tonight and you take a minute video of your coworker dancing to the 80s music, and you post that to your company repository and send out a company-wide email, hey, check this out, right? You don't really need or want everybody in the company trying to access that high-resolution version, right? You still may want to keep it for a press release or something like that when you need that high-quality source. But for most activities within your repository, you're not going to need that. You don't want people trying to access that. So you want a normalized, lower resolution version with known codecs, known bit rate. And there are things you can do like move this fast start header. There's a thing called a move atom that exists in many file formats. It tells about information about the streams, about the codecs, how long things are. Oftentimes that's unfortunately at the end of a file. But if you move that to the beginning, then many players will be able to interpret that and know about those streams and enable people to start playing things before they've downloaded the entire file and be able to skip around within that file very easily. So you do need that stuff. We have particular user interface needs, of course, around rich media. We've seen some of that introduced into Alfresco already with things like the gallery view, film strip view. If you guys haven't played with that yet, I encourage you to check it out. Lots of fun. And of course, we've had a video player right out of Share for quite a while. Quite a while. Sometimes it feels like watching something on this. So you'll be happy to know that the Media Management module introduces a completely new video player based on Video.js, which is an HTML5 framework, JavaScript framework as well, which unifies the user interface across browsers and across different playback technologies, and unifies the JavaScript API access across those different player technologies. It makes it much easier to work with when you need to do things like skip to a particular point in the video. Now this is HTML5 by default. It does have a fallback to Flash and other technologies. So that can be used if your browser doesn't have HTML5 support, but that's pretty common these days. There aren't too many. So more importantly though, it can fall back on an individual file and say that this particular browser's HTML5 playback capabilities does not support this file format or codec that it's encoded in. So it can roll back to Flash just for that particular file. And again, seamless user interface, seamless API calls. End user would never know that it's Flash, nor would most developers. But the other cool thing that we do with this video player is that we're going to request the video proxy, that normalized lower resolution video, before we actually try to play it for the user. Again, with that known resolution codec bitrate. And we're doing that through those same abstract transformation options that we talked about. And we can get that transcoding off of the repo, as we saw, into different services, remote transcoders, but it still takes time. Remember, we can have an hour-long video, depending on the hardware and compression, can easily take an hour to transcode or more. So we need to report progress back to the users. It's incredibly important. We don't want to have 50 different users requesting the same transcoding over and over again. And we want to be able to give users some feedback about how long that this process is happening, how long it's going to take to complete. So we can take a look at a demo of that. So here I've got a program called Media Info. This is just really a file inspection utility, media inspection utility. And if you can't see what's going on here, we have things like the data rate. We're seeing that it's 10 megabits per second. We have showing that it's 1080p resolution, 30 frames per second. We've got AVC audio codecs, so we can see a lot of information about the file. So if we pull that into Share and we navigate to the document details, you can see I've requested this proxy transformation, and now I'm actually getting progress back and estimated time remaining. And another user that would come in to this same document details page would see that same progress. So now we're playing our video, more kids here, playing our video of all this anticipation. Is he going to throw it? Just throw it. It takes so long. So if we go and look at what's actually being played there, and we grab that URL of what's actually being played, open that up. If we say, let's save that off, we're going to look at that. We have a name of H.264.720. That's going to give us a hint already of what we're dealing with. So if we open that in another player, let's say QuickTime player, go to the file info, what we're seeing here is that we are dealing with, in fact, a 720 resolution version. Our file size is only 5 megabytes. One reason is that we've also reduced the bitrate to 2.5 megabits there, whereas our original file was almost 20 megabytes. So already in just a few seconds of a file, it makes it much easier to consume that on multiple devices and pass that around to different people. So those proxies are renditions of content. Most of you probably know that renditions in Alfresco and otherwise are alternate representations of content. So we've had these renditions for a while. We've had thumbnail definitions, things like that for a while. We could hit a URL to request a thumbnail be generated. But there hasn't been a really easy way to see all of the existing renditions that have been created, the available configured rendition definitions, certainly not to see anything in progress. And there hasn't been a really easy way or a consolidated way then to request that a new rendition be created from, let's say, a defined configuration. And again, this is really important for rich media. We talked about a document might have a PDF version, and again, an image might have, we've seen some customer implementations with, I think it was 60 different renditions for each image that came in. You can have similar things for video. You might have need for a WebM file format with a VP8 codec for one particular distribution mechanism versus your H.264 MPEG-4 file. So the Media Management module adds this renditions panel. Now, if you can see here, you probably can't see here, but we've got the different renditions listed. There's a little blue bar there. That's actually our same progress bar from our other proxy rendition. So we can see progress on renditions right in the renditions panel. For the one that we're viewing, for the proxy that we're viewing, obviously it's already on that page, but again, we talked about there might be a WebM version that someone else has requested, so you as a user come in, you can see that that's already being generated. For the ones that exist already, we can see a different icon, the MIME type icon here in image. As we hover, we can see details like that media type, and rewind that just a bit. A little bit more. If we hover over some of those rendition definitions, we can see all the details of those transformation options that we talked about, all the details around codec, bitrate, frame rate, everything that we're going to shoot for in that target. And then, of course, clicking on the little plus icon is going to request a new rendition, and then clicking on the existing indicator is going to open up that particular rendition, in that case, an image. So our EXIF, fantastic for photos, right? There's lots of good information in there, but hardly any of it is applicable to video. We need some more defined metadata model around video to express things like the codec, the bitrate, and some of the informational metadata associated with videos as well. And there are several competing existing standards out there. We evaluated a lot of them. And PB Core is what came out to really be doing a pretty good job at being agnostic to different industries and having a good mix of technical and informational metadata available in the schema. So if we look at that, if we look at the document details of the video that we were just looking at, we can see on the right-hand side here the PB Core details. We see things about the different streams involved, the codecs that they're encoded in, the bit rates for both the audio and video, your sampling rate, frame rate. So again, that's important information to have to be able to determine if a particular file is going to be sufficient quality for whatever it is you need to use it for. And that's great to have in document details, but as you can see here, we also have this new notion of what we call quantitative metadata. So I need some indicator when I'm browsing through a whole list of these things in the document library of, is this the 2-minute segment from the summit presentation where he's talking about quantitative metadata, or is it the entire 40-minute rambling that is the full video? So you've got this quantitative indicator, for those of you that can't see it, that says it's 15 seconds, so you can see right from the document library which one it is that you're trying to get at, how much there is to consume. And this idea doesn't just apply to rich media. If you throw a document in here, you're going to get the number of pages, for example. Is this the 5-page excerpt I need, or is it the full 200-page document? Now, you saw a little bit about this morning with the video trim. We often have video that's unusable at the beginning or end. We might not like all the anticipation in our snowball throw. Luckily, we can edit that directly out of Share. We can click our edit icon. We can set our start and end range. We can click that trim. Sorry, my player It's in the way there. We click that trim icon. We are seeing progress there. That's actually going against a content transformation REST API endpoint that can be used for other media editing capabilities, things like cropping photos as well. So again, we click that button, we set that range. That's forming those abstract transformation options. In this case, we're dealing with, you guys are technical, temporal source options, where we're defining an offset and a duration. And that's being translated by those workers to figure out what the command lines or service API calls are needed to satisfy that requirement. So as we trim that, we can see that it's version. We've got a version 1.1 there, so we can always get back to the original source. And now we have a new source, so we need a new proxy rendition. So we create that, and now when we click on the video, we can see that it's the much shorter version, and we get right to the final snowball throw. Thank you. And again, similar features around that with things like cropping, rotating of images, all going through that content transformation API. We saw a little bit about this too. Obviously, we've had comments for a while, and in the case of time-based media, we have comments that might apply to just a particular point in time. So, for example, here we could pause that. We could say this is where the actual snowball throw is, and we can grab that time code. And you can see there's a range there too. By default, we're sticking in 2 seconds if you don't specify an end. And we can see that as we hover over that comment, we get the timeline. We can use that to navigate to it. Takes us right to that point in the video. And if we refresh the page or another user comes in here, what we're going to see is that there are indicators that there are comments right in our video timeline. And as we hover over those, we can see the actual comment, and of course use that to navigate to that point in the video. And if that's not enough, we also publish those as a closed captioning format, a web VTT format. So you can actually turn that on, and let's say you wanted to view this thing full screen, then those closed captions would pop up on the screen just like a normal closed captioning that you're used to.
Does that work for audio as well?
Yeah, you could do the same thing for audio. And this is just an extension of the existing comment model. And we'll have other things related to the timeline. You saw the indicators there, the comments. We'll have things like storyboard thumbnails as well. So, some of the other features that we're targeting here. Towards the end of the content lifecycle, you often have a need to publish outside of your organization or sometimes internally, but geographically distributed. So we have integration with CDN services like Amazon CloudFront for just a kind of generic CDN that's easy to use and everybody has access to pretty easily, and more targeted CDNs like Brightcove for video, where they're going to give you more detailed analytics and is really a targeted video platform. Some other things that I mentioned a little bit related when we were talking about PB Core are things like common content relationships. So if I do trim a video, let's say I want to trim it as a copy of a video. I don't want to, it's not necessarily unusable, but I do want just that 2-minute segment on quantitative metadata or trimming from the summit presentation. I may want to create a new version of that, keep it associated with the original source. This becomes particularly important when you're dealing with licensing and rights management. You need to maintain that relationship. So defining those common modeling relationships between different types of derivatives or aggregate works. And one thing that's really common that we've seen from a lot of partners, lots of implementations around these shareable collections, are sometimes called lightboxes in digital asset management world, where I don't want to move a file around in my folder structure or copy it. Certainly don't want duplicate content, particularly if we're talking about 2 GB videos or larger. I just want to associate that with a collection or an album, have like a shopping cart-like experience, put this stuff in there, share it with somebody else, particularly in the workflow of doing selects, where I want to present somebody with 10 different images, please pick one for this marketing brochure. And what digital asset management system would be complete without some sort of dark theme? So we supply a share site theme that has muted background. It's not just for fun, it is important. The desktop applications have gotten this right quite a while ago. particularly with rich media, it's really important to focus on that content. So you mute your interface, you mute your buttons. It's still there. You can still get to all of it, but it really helps you to focus and really connect with the content that you're dealing with. So provide a dark theme associated with share as well. So this is an add-on module. It goes against 4.2 and 5.0. This should be available Q1, maybe even Q4 this year. And we've had lots of interest from lots of different partners that are looking to build solutions that go hand in hand with this sort of thing. So definitely stop by all of their booths and see what they're working on in the future. And I'm happy to take any questions. I also have, I know we're running a little late here, I also have office hours or expert hours right after this if anybody has detailed questions, but happy to take some now. Yes?
One of the things that we sometimes see with video management is that it's split up in scenes and have metadata per scene, so you can jump into part of the video. Is that anywhere on the roadmap already?
So the question is around having metadata associated with different scenes within a video, and that is on the roadmap. Certainly you could do it with the existing stuff that you just saw using comments sort of manually, but even things like automatic scene detection are also on the roadmap to be able to utilize frameworks that can go in and tell when the scene has changed and put a marker in there.
Is there a face detection on photos on the roadmap?
So the question is there face detection on the roadmap? Yes, that's also on the roadmap. So there's kind of two parts to that. One thing is identifying that there is a face, and there's a whole other part of who is the face. So there are certainly open source frameworks out there that we can integrate with, but you then have to pretty well define a particular library. But there are also services that we can integrate that can draw upon a much larger library of web images everywhere and images that they've culled to be able to have a better matching percentage on that actual recognition of who it is.
Same idea, an automatic taxonomy or identification of what it is, landscape, mountain, person, tag words.
So the question is automatic detection of essentially objects or things depicted in the scene. And yes, that's also on the roadmap. Some of the same organizations, same services that provide some of the facial recognition stuff provide that same level of detail. Getting into, if y'all haven't seen some of the really recent work coming out around this, there are companies out there that can detect the product in a particular shot. So the end goal there is having somebody view a video and a purse goes by, and then the woman can click on the purse, or the man, click on the purse, buy that purse right out of there because it knows exactly what product that is, and being able to link those two up. So that's kind of in its early days. It's a couple of years that stuff has been out. So expect to see a lot more of that kind of technology being integrated in this stuff. Yes?
Speech to text.
So the question is speech to text. Is that on the roadmap? Yes, that is also on the roadmap and a high priority on the roadmap. There again, you have opportunities to utilize libraries like Sphinx, but unless you're dealing with a pretty constricted set of content with known voices, it is extremely difficult to come up with any kind of reasonable match for those libraries. You have to have huge volumes of data dictionaries and phenomes defined and all of this stuff in perfect alignment, and it has to be at the right sample rate. There's a lot of different moving parts to keep that going and have any kind of reasonable response and match out of that. But there are, again, a lot of services out there that will maintain that library for you and have people speaking with all sorts of different accents and all sorts of different languages out there. And some of them will use automatic transcription and maintain those libraries. Some of them will use human transcription, and it comes back in a day. And then we can just index it then. Some of them use a combination of the two. So there's going to be opportunities there, I think, to integrate with those services. I think that's going to end up being a more popular solution as we go forward. Yes?
Just with regards to that speech to text, one of my colleagues, I don't think he's been working on it,
Yes, sorry, I should mention that. Romain has a talk where he's integrating Sphinx, Pocket Sphinx, and doing exactly that. Sort of proof of concept of, can I take a video, obviously then you want to take out the audio, have an audio rendition of that, pass that through to essentially a content transformer that you're asking for audio to text. And in the case of Sphinx, it's going to listen to that file, compare it to all those dictionaries, and produce a text result that you can then associate with the source content, and it gets indexed like anything else.
GeoInfo polygon set, it will be on the roadmap.
I'm sorry, what was that?
GeoInfo polygon. Attach a polygon set as metadata to content.
So the question is, will you be able to attach a polygon set as metadata, essentially being able to, I assume, essentially being able to draw two-dimensional things and time-based. So yes, that is also on the roadmap. There are some integrations with services that can do that real time. There's a product called Review Studio. One of our partners has an integration with where you can have 5 people in a real-time session even, pause a video, somebody can circle and say, take that guy out. Then there are other partners that are dealing with formats like Sparkle MM and Open Annotate where you can define some of those things as well. So yeah, we'll definitely be integrating more of that stuff as well. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much for coming.